Okay, now we're up and going. I hate this thing. It's always in the way for me. But all right. I don't think there's any other announcements. For chapter 6, the practice test, there is no problem with it. It's all correct. However, in the email I sent you, I said ignore these questions 7, 11, and 15. We skipped that material this semester in the interest of time. It was about voluntary and involuntary reflexes and sensory organs of the muscle system. All right, don't worry about that. Okay, let's get this. Okay, out of the way. Okay, so ideally today, we'll finish the immune system. Okay. So I think I jumped around because I was talking about the effect of antibodies. And then I forget what I jumped ahead to, but I jumped several slides ahead. So now I've gone back. All right. Because I want to talk about the practice flow diagrams that I have. So we're on this slide. We covered it. And back here, when the B cells that make antibodies, right, encounter the pathogen that has the antigens that it was designed for, those antibodies are going to stick to that pathogen, and all those pathogens, those cells are going to stick together, much like what happened with your red blood cells. If you had a particular antigen on it, and if you had added the antibody against those antigens, your blood cells stuck together. All right, and that's what you saw in the dish. So yeah, that's what those antibodies do. The plasma cell chucks those antibodies out, but when it encounters the pathogen with the antigen on it, it will also clonally replicate itself. So it will increase its number exponentially. And so that is another way that it's protecting you. It's talking about being sick and getting vaccinated, right? So here we have a B cell that has antibodies, the little green Y things. And here are, these could be, it says antigens, it could be little cocci bacteria, but let's just say they're antigens. And so the antigens get stuck to the antibodies, and then there's clumping that goes on, and the rest of your immune cells go to the clumped pathogen and destroy it. But that B cell that encountered the antigen, it also stimulates it to clonally replicate itself. And so this would go on, this would have 2 more, this would have 2 more, and so on and so on. Okay. And I talked about 2 types of cells, plasma B cells for immediate action. And I said, put up your dukes, which is an old term for this. You're ready to go now. You're ready to fight now. You're ready to go encounter a pathogen and destroy it. And then memory B cells, which kind of wait in your immune system if that antigen is detected again at a future date. And the thing is, once you've been exposed to a pathogen, whether it's naturally, bless you, remember I have tissues, or it's been a vaccination, something like that, you produce a lot of these memory B cells that go and wait in your immune system. And the next time you encounter that pathogen, you get a huge response. And I think I jumped to the primary response and secondary response graph where I had the Lord of the Rings analogy. Your first exposure, your first vaccination, however you're exposed, naturally or artificially with a vaccine. Yeah, your body will make plasma B cells. They're ready to protect you now, but they don't have as many. And then you'll form some memory B cells in your immune system, and they will go wait. And you'll have a lot of these. All right, have a ton of these. The second time you're exposed, and remember this first exposure, it took 2 or 3 weeks for you to produce these. All right, the second time you're exposed to the actual pathogen, like if someone's sick next to you, or you get a booster, these cells come out from waiting in huge numbers, like a huge army. All right, and that is when they protect you on day 1 of exposure. That's the value of a vaccine, is after you've been exposed, the next time you're exposed, as long as it's after 3 weeks, okay? On day 1 of that exposure, you're going to have the huge army coming out of your immune system ready to fight the pathogen day 1 of exposure. And that's what the value is of the vaccination. So I feel like I'm promoting, but I am kind of, because you all are getting sick. And I said, get your flu vaccine. I wasn't kidding. All right. Now, I have this pathway. It is the sequence of events. Now, not this upcoming exam on Monday, all right? This is going to be for a final exam, and this chapter is on the final exam. Please use this, okay? It's what happens from when a pathogen enters your body to making antibodies. Okay, so we start here. Bacteria enters the tissue from a break in the skin. Second step, phagocytic white blood cells in the bloodstream. I gave you two. The first responders, neutrophils, and then monocytes. Then they do all their thing. Reset your hypothalamic temperature so you can have a fever. They send out cytokines and chemokines, which are chemical cries for help. They do all that. But one of these white blood cells in the bloodstream can leave the bloodstream. That's going to be a monocyte can leave. And then it becomes a macrophage. Then this thing, when it found the pathogen, kills it and adds the antigens on its surface. That's an antigen presenting cell. And then it's waiting for a cell of cell mediated immunity. That means T cells to interact with. All right. So the APC is waiting for a helper T cell. Okay. Then it gets activated, the helper T, and then it runs the show. It's bossy. It tells every part of the immune system what to do after that. So 6, activated cell from here, helper T cell activates these cells. So helper T activates this cell of cell mediated immunity. That's more T cells, which can directly kill a pathogen. Cytotoxic T cell. This cell gets activated. It keeps a memory of the pathogen, memory T cell. This cell is actually part of antibody mediated adaptive immunity. So the helper T cell activates B cells. All right. And now we've got, let's move this up. Okay, we're here. The B cell here can make blank, otherwise known as immunoglobulins, antibodies. Then the B cell encounters its pathogen, and the following happens. Agglutination. All right. And then that B cell, when it encounters its pathogen, it clonally replicates itself. That's so, and there's the key. Look, it's thinking. Yes, I know. All right, it's going to take a while to, all right, but there it all is. Okay. Okay. Oops. Okay, and then the next thing, this will help, these two slides will help you study the entire immune system. There you go. Categories of immunity. Innate immunity, also called non-specific versus adaptive, which is known as specific immunity, humoral immunity. There's one more, okay? And then this starts with external innate, your barriers. So what would be one barrier, the biggest barrier you have in your body? Your skin, okay? What about in your airways? Tonsils. But if you have your tonsils removed deep down in your alveoli, you have alveolar macrophages. Okay, what about if you ingest something that's a pathogen? What will kill it? Digestive, and the acid in your stomach. Okay, what about the urethra? If something could get up through the urethra, it's acidic. What about the vaginal canal? It's acidic, okay? What about if it tries to come in through your eyes? Tears are antimicrobial, okay? Then this would be, once it gets in, internal innate immunity. The first responders are really your white blood cells, which could secrete endogenous pyrogen, so you have a fever. They will, they can directly attack a pathogen. They can secrete chemokines, cytokines, chemical cries for help. There's lots. All right. Then we'll have mast cells that secrete histamine. We will have natural killer cells that secrete interferon to kill viruses, or toxic granules to kill tumor cells. Then we have complement proteins, which destroy bacteria by poking holes in them. Okay. Here we have T cells and B cells. B cells is easy. We have put up your dukes and fight, plasma B cells, and then we have the ones that wait in your immune system, memory B cells. Here at the very top, okay, so T cells, B, this will be the helper T cell, most important at the top. Then we have cytotoxic T, we have memory T, we have regulatory T. So if you look at that, and again, I don't know if I, yeah. Oh, it goes to the same one, but you scroll down and there we go, okay? So I made sure that my writing was at least legible, and sometimes it's not, okay, but I did this time. So that's your entire immune system right there. That's the best way to study this for the final, all right? Okay. So I was talking about you're exposed to a pathogen. I say natural exposure versus artificial. So I'm going to use that again. But let's back up and talk about active immunity versus passive. All right. Active immunity. If you're active, you're doing something, you're working for something. So active immunity is when your body has to work. You might have been exposed to a sick person, or you could have been vaccinated. Okay. Active, get immunity antibodies that you produce. I'm going to say here, change the ink color, that you work to produce. Your body must make the antibodies. Your body must work. Okay. This is the process that takes 2 to 3 weeks of time. That's work. Now, if it's passive, your body does not have to work. Okay. You do not have to work. For the antibodies. They're given to you. Okay, it says here, you get antibodies from a source outside your body. It could be breast milk. You think about a baby. Babies come out, they're not fully cooked, right? Lots of organ systems aren't fully mature yet. Their immune system is not ready yet, okay? If you have a newborn, don't take it to all the holiday parties, okay? Don't let strangers go up and go, yo, don't touch my baby. It doesn't have a competent immune system yet, and it's too young to be vaccinated because its immune system is so young. Even if you vaccinated it, there'd be no response because its immune system is not capable of making antibodies yet. How do they get protected? Their own innate immunity that they're born with, but big time, mom's breast milk, all the antibodies she's produced throughout her whole life, she's given them to her. And the first few days after having a child, the first milk is called colostrum. It's really thick and yellow. It's thick with antibodies, okay? So it really protects the baby. Or you could get injected the antibodies. So let me give you an example of this. What happens if you get bit by a snake? We live in South Carolina in the warm weather. Cottonmouth, not cottonmouth, but copperhead is the most common venomous snake around. What happens if you get bit? You have to get a shot of antibodies, anti-serum, snake anti-venom. They basically injected, sometimes I think they do it with horses, but they might use other farm animals. I don't think to the point where they can make them in a lab. But that animal, it's a low dose. All right, this is not sick stuff they're doing to animals. The animal makes antibodies to that venom, and then their blood is collected and the serum is strained and, sterilized and everything. Well, not sterilized, but it's strained. And then you can give that injection to someone who's been snake bit. What happens if you are exposed to tetanus? All right, and your tetanus vaccine has waned. Okay, it's been more than 10 years. You go in, you've got a deep puncture wound, you're at risk of forming tetanus because of that. And you say, well, it's been over 10 years since my tetanus vaccine. They give you a booster of the tetanus vaccine, but they also give you an injection of tetanus anti-sera, antibodies against it to protect you. So that's very common in health. All right. Okay, so we have the categories. Active immunity, you must work. Okay. So active, natural, stop at the top here. If it's active, your body makes it. If it's natural, you do it in response to you were exposed. Come on, pen. You were exposed to a sick person. I don't know what's up with that laser pointer. Exposed to a sick person. Okay, which might be happening in this classroom because I notice a lot of you are down. I'm getting emails like crazy all over the place. I'm sick. And not only that, they've been sick for 4 or 5 days. I follow someone on Facebook here in town, and her and her kid have been suffering for going on 2 weeks. So get that booster. All right, get that vaccine. If it's active artificial, you are vaccinated. Go away. There we go. I have no idea. Let's see if I can do it. Vaccination. You are vaccinated. Your body now makes the antibody. It's going to take 2 or 3 weeks. Okay. So in the meantime, because Dr. Bravo said, go get your flu shot. You're going to go get your flu shot, right? Right. Because we want to make it through the exam on Monday. And then the few days we have left of the semester, make it through that. There's nothing worse than being sick when you're trying to take final exams. Okay. Okay. Passive. You don't have to work. The antibodies are given to you. there's natural, and then there's artificial. So the natural passive is breast milk. It's not synthesized in a lab or in some other organism, like a horse or something. Passive artificial is you're given a serum with antibody in it. All right, so think about, you bit by a venomous snake, you have to give the snake antitoxin, which is anti-venom, which is antibodies against it, or tetanus, and there's other examples too. All right, so is it relevant to nursing? Yes. And I don't know what your opinion about vaccinations are, but I am totally pro-vaccination because, yeah, it saves millions and millions of lives. Do some people have a reaction to the vaccine? Yes, a very small percentage can have a reaction to the vaccine. Every time I get vaccinated for the flu or shingles or COVID, I have a reaction. I get a slight fever, I feel achy, I go through the chill cycle. But you know what? Damn it, it's worth it. Because if I were exposed and my immune system's not ready to protect me, you know, it could be bad. People die. Okay. Autoimmune disorders. I've only included the things that we haven't talked about this, so technically I'll cross it out. But there's a lot of autoimmune disorders that you're going to learn about, many more than this. And I included the very common ones. So arthritis, there's a form of it that's your immune system attacking your joints. And it's no respecter of age. I've seen people who are 16, 17, 18 years old have rheumatoid arthritis, and it's terrible because they're still growing at that age. We did talk about rheumatic heart disease when we were talking about valve problems and heart murmurs, okay? Rheumatic heart disease is where your body produces antibodies that attack your valves, in particular, the bicuspid valve, so on the left side, and that's bad because the left side is what's processing your oxygen-rich blood. And if that valve is not working and blood's backing up, your brain and your heart are not getting the oxygen they need. Multiple sclerosis, we talked about that a long time ago, where antibodies attack the myelin sheaths on your neurons, and signals can't get from point A to point B very well if they're slow or they're blocked. Graves' disease, we talked about that in the endocrine system. Your immune system attacks your thyroid gland. And then myasthenia gravis, we talked about in the muscle chapter. Your immune system, antibodies attack. It's not just nicotinic. I'm just going to cross that out because that's not true. It's all ACH receptors, not just the nicotinic cholinergic. It goes after the skeletal muscle receptors first, but eventually it goes after the smooth muscle, heart muscle, all that stuff. Okay. All right. So I'll ask you a question on autoimmune disorders on the final exam, and I'll describe it like this, and you just pick it out from the answer lineup. Okay. So technically, we've covered the material for this chapter. Best way to study it is those two flow diagrams. Now here, you can just listen and we can talk, all right? As nurses, I already said this before, you're gonna be the one who's spending most time with the patient. That means they're gonna be talking to you more, they're gonna be asking you questions. I mean, the doctors and PAs and nurse practitioners, they're great, but they got a lot on their docket. They got a lot to do in a day, and so they can't spend, you know, an hour or two with a patient. And if you're on the floor and a patient's hospitalized, you're going to be checking on them every few hours or something like that. So you see them a lot. In the clinic, if someone comes in for a vaccination, you might encounter, they got a little baby, and it's about the right age for vaccination. All right. And they're like, well, you know, your child's right on track for getting its first set of measles, mumps, rubella vaccine. Okay. And they're like, oh no, we're not doing that. And you're like, why? And you start talking to them and what's their thinking, and they've heard all this stuff. So we'll get to that in a second. All right. But really, can you imagine what would happen in our world, not just our country, if the majority of people just didn't want to get vaccinated for COVID? They just said, nope. Had a hard enough time just getting people to wear masks. All right. Can you imagine? Millions of people already died from COVID, millions. Okay. Can you imagine if they developed a vaccine and everyone said, nope, you don't know what smallpox is, do you? Smallpox. In this country, when Europeans came over and the Native American populations, and there were millions of Native Americans, came over, they'd never been exposed to smallpox, but in Europe, it had been around for a while. I don't know how many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And so people there, after exposure, the people who could form antibodies tended to be the survivors, and then they had some mild protection. But then when the Europeans came over and colonized the Americas, the native populations had never been exposed to it, and they died by the millions from smallpox. All right. And there were no vaccinations at that time. That's kind of what would have happened to us if COVID hit and there was no vaccine, or people didn't vaccinate. Millions and millions and millions of people would die. So smallpox is a killer. All right. So if you took microbiology with Pryor, I know he covered this. I don't know if Lyles does, but she probably does because she's pretty good. This scientist, Jenner, noticed that milkmaids who basically milk the cows, I don't know if they were hired, they rarely had smallpox. And so he reasoned with knowledge that the milkmaids were immune to smallpox because they'd been exposed to cowpox. And cowpox, cows have it, and it doesn't usually kill them. It's just, the sores form around the udder area, and the milkmaids milking the cows were exposed to those sores, and they've been exposed to that virus. The virus was similar enough to the smallpox virus that the milkmaids developed antibodies. He didn't know it at that time. They developed antibodies against the cowpox that was sufficient enough to be protective against the smallpox. We know this now from COVID, okay? That especially the Omicron vaccine variety there, and it's going to change yet. It's close enough to protect you from different strains of COVID. It's the same concept. So this stuff that happened way back there, we're living it right now with a new virus. All right. Is this relevant to everyday nursing? Yeah. This stuff isn't just the history books. We're now living in what's going to be in future history books. All right. Same concept. So to test this, you can't do these tests anymore. You can't expose children to cowpox and then actual smallpox. But at the time, there were no regulations. So he exposed boys. I'm sure it's not just one, right? I'm sure there were losses. Exposed a boy to cowpox. And I don't know if he waited 3 weeks. I don't think the knowledge was there at all. But then he exposed the kid to smallpox, and the boy did not suffer the deadly effects of the smallpox. All right. So this was really the first immunization with a virus that's not lethal to humans or even cows, but it's enough to make the immune system make antibodies that are protective against a virus that's somewhat similar. Same thing's happening with COVID now, and that's what we're doing. All right. Okay, so we saw this before. Really quickly, the first exposure to something novel, your first vaccination to the flu virus of the year. 2-3 weeks later, you're making some antibodies, but it's a good response. Is it completely protective? Nah. But then, and eventually those antibodies will drop down. Really, the memory B cells go hide out in your immune system. That's probably why it drops. Then, so, here we have the poor little immune response and you're outnumbered. But if you get the second booster, 3 weeks, 4 weeks later, all right, now all those memory B cells that were waiting in the wings for that pathogen to make an appearance, they're like, you're done for, because we've been waiting for you and we're ready to go. And that's what that second booster does. Okay. So that's why I jumped ahead to this. So if you covered it in micro, great. You probably covered it in much more detail. But the reason I'm going over this with you, and I think it's important to take this class time, is you are going to have to be talking to these patients and trying to explain it to them in a way they can understand that, these pathogens that we have vaccines for. Yeah. Is it possible you could have a little reaction? Yes. If you take an aspirin, there's side effects. Everything you take. Okay, if you read the bottle, you take, I've got a fever, I'm going to take Tylenol. Oh, damn, can cause liver damage. Sucks. But you know what? My fever's 103 and I think I'm going to risk it. Okay, anything you take, there's a small chance of something happening. Okay, so in the US, before measles vaccine became available, mid-1960s, I wasn't even born, little more than 500,000 cases with a good number of deaths per year. And I think that's very conservative. After the vaccine, a 99.9% decrease in the incidence of the disease. In fact, it was considered eradicated. Measles, mumps, and rubella were considered eradicated. because of the vaccination. And now, have you heard about the resurgence of measles in the United States? There's pockets of the country that are choosing not to vaccinate their children. And if they get exposed to it, all right, let's say someone visits from another country where they don't have good health care and they don't have vaccinations. Then all those kids get exposed, and now we've got measles resurgence. And if an adult gets exposed to measles, it's really bad. All right. Well, anyway, so do not memorize all this, but here's a short list of basically vaccinations that eradicated diseases. And I've highlighted measles, mumps, rubella. Okay. So here is the morbidity, how many people got sick, mortality is how people die. And once the vaccinations were made, greater than 99% decrease in illness and death from those diseases. People who are not vaccinated for the measles, mumps, rubella, that's actually responsible for the resurgence of it. It is, Google it later. All right. It's true. It's happening. And I include some information about that. Here, polio. Did you ever learn about polio in microbiology? Some of you, yes. All right. Debilitating. All right. Polio. People who are exposed to it as children, and people can be exposed to stuff and their immune system's really good and it fights it off. But there are those individuals in the population where that's not the case. And they became, basically they lost muscle control, paralyzed the muscles. Eventually your diaphragm is paralyzed. And these people who had this, it was polio. And they had scoliosis of their spine really badly because the muscles weakened. Your muscles are supposed to be kind of keeping things tight and in balance and opposing each other. And with muscle weakness in your back, they had curved spines and all that. Terrible thing. What else do we have? Smallpox. You don't worry about smallpox, right? Vaccinations eradicated. It's considered extinct. All right. Although some government lab is probably holding on to it to use it for, biological warfare. All right. And tetanus. We still have to get tetanus vaccinated. To be in college, you have to be tetanus vaccinated. To step foot in a hospital and work there, you have to be tetanus vaccinated. And of course, to step foot in McLeod or MUSC to work as nursing students, you're going to have to be vaccinated. The nursing program will not make you get vaccinated for COVID, but they won't let you do rounds at McLeod or MUSC. Those hospitals say, if you're not vaccinated, you ain't coming in. All right. So there it is. All right. So do vaccinations cause autism? This is what started the whole thing. And you're looking like you're well aware of this, right? So here's the story. If you've heard it, great. But if you haven't, there is no research or anywhere in the world that's been doing this research to prove that vaccinations cause autism. All right. I think what's happening with autism, like lots of diseases, is we're getting better at detecting it early and earlier because we're knowing the signs and science is getting better. So it seems like autism is on the rise. It's just because we're better at diagnosing it earlier so that you can treat people earlier so they can have more of a semblance of a normal life. So here's what happened. There is this scientist called Andrew Wakefield, and he published a study in 1995, so probably before some of you were born, in a study of 12 children. You've seen me in lab, right? And our labs are, Monday labs, I think 16, 17 people, and Tuesday's lab is 18 people, okay? And we do these little experiments, right? And our sample size, let's say our sample size is 14, like the lab report on blood pressure, okay? If I ran a little study and exposed you to something and then measured your responses and whatever on 14 people, would I feel comfortable making broad statements to the whole world based on that? No. 12 is terrible sample size. Modern day studies are hundreds, if not upon thousands and thousands of people. All right. And then those studies are replicated, not just by that researcher, but other researchers. Once they publish their data, other researchers say, I'm going to replicate this study. I was a scientist. I did work on something and for my master's degree and published. And then, like 8-10 years down the line, someone asked me for a copy of my publication. I sent it. He was replicating my study and he was a big person in the field. Thank God he found the same things I found, because I was like, oh God, did I make a mistake? This still happens in the scientific community. It's replicated. And then finally you say, okay, we can see a clear trend. 12? No. Okay. So he showed that they were vaccinated with the measles, mumps, rubella vaccines. Okay. And this at that time was a different schedule that they have now. And he basically said that he projected, without any real scientific evidence to back it up, that it could alter immune systems, causing intestinal woes. I'm not sure exactly what intestinal woes are. And they could damage the brain, and then speculated autism. He wasn't studying autism. We don't even know what causes autism. He didn't know what causes autism. And so this is a very wild speculation. But anyway, so yeah, the scientific community did what the scientific community does. They look at the data, they think about it, they look at the sources, they think about what the projections from the study were and replicate them. So dozens of epidemiological studies found no merit to his work. They tried to replicate what he did and they could not find it at all. Okay. His claims were based on a tiny sample size. Yeah. All right. In this modern day and age, you won't be able to publish on a sample size of 12. Forget it. The British Medical Journal called his research fraudulent. If someone called my research fraudulent, I would just go to New Zealand and live in a cave, because I don't think I could show my face again in scientific society. That's a big old slap on the hand. The British journal Lancet, which is a top one journal like Nature and Science, retracted his publication. They pulled it. All right. British, so bad, they stripped him of his medical license. That's how bad it was. So the scientific community was, no, dude, no, you're so wrong. But people believed him. All right. I mean, if you want to go down a rabbit hole, go down conspiracy theory rabbit holes. But this is kind of what happened is groups of people, specifically in the United States, start to not vaccinate their kids. So nationwide, the vaccination rate against the diseases like measles, mumps, rubella, stuff like that is usually 90% or higher to be effective. But now in some pockets of the United States, because of people not vaccinating their kids, it's that percentage of vaccination is dropping. All right. So if you want to read further, you can click these links. But basically, the health industry says you need herd immunity, and to get herd immunity to protect the society, you need a vaccination rate of 95% and higher. Did we get that with COVID? Not even close. All right. But it was still protective. Is it optimal? No, because COVID is still hitting us, right? We're still out there, and it's been mutating and mutating and mutating. Fortunately, it's been mutating to a strain that's less virulent, easy to spread, but less likely to cause severe disease if you're healthy. If you are not healthy, if you have an autoimmune disorder and you're taking immunosuppressants, if you're very young or very old, or you have conflicting problems like bad diabetes, other health problems, even if you're vaccinated, you're going to have problems. But herd immunity, the whole reason, this is why Francis Marion, the masks and everything were mandatory, okay? Protection, herd immunity. So herd immunity is when you're protected from an infectious disease when a large percent of the population has become immune. Either natural exposure and they became immune, which can happen if you don't have a vaccine for it, or you're vaccinated. All right. So that's what happened with COVID. And we knew COVID was coming pre-2019 because it was in other countries. And since we are a society where people can jump on a plane and get here, and before we really knew what was going on, people were already bringing it over, or people from here were traveling away someplace and then bringing it back. And there was no vaccine at the time. Okay, so you are reducing the potential exposure of non-immune people, especially those that are vulnerable. If you're young and healthy, you might be fine, all right, because you're young and healthy and your immune system's good. But if you're sick and in a hospital, if you're immunocompromised, if you're very old or all these problems or sick with something else, you're vulnerable. So you getting vaccinated in your age group, yeah, it protects you, but you're probably already pretty good because your immune system's pretty good and you're young. But if you go in a hospital, MUSC, McLeod, and you go on a ward where there's people recovering from surgery, they've got huge, it's sutured up and everything like that. They got the big cut and, pathogens can get it. What happens if you go into a room with someone who's got AIDS? What happens if you go into the room with someone who's taking immunosuppressants for an autoimmune disorder? They're very vulnerable. You go in a room with a baby or someone who's like 80, 90 years old. If you're not vaccinated, if you don't have antibodies, you could be bringing that to them. It's not hurting you any. You seem to be okay, maybe some sniffles or whatever, but that could be a death sentence to those people. All right. So this is what you got to talk to people about. All right. So herd immunity is, here we have a population that's not vaccinated, but they're still healthy. And then we have the danger, the red. Let's move this down here and this over. Okay, we have the red people. They're not immunized and they're sick and they're contagious. And here we have them right here. And look at the zone. Have you ever watched a video of someone sneezing on slow motion video? All right. So if it's airborne, okay. So after a certain amount of time, here's what that population looks like. Most of the people who were previously not immunized but healthy, now they're sick. And the people who are farther away from a center of infection, those people, like distance, keep your distance 6 feet. All right. Distance. If you're farther away from a point of infection, you might get out unscathed. All right. That was the social distancing thing. Okay. Now here we have yellow are people who've been vaccinated, or it says immunized. Okay. And here we have the same points of infection, the red people, and then the blue people still not immunized, but currently healthy. After a certain amount of time, you still get a lot of infection, and the people who are farther out were good, but notice where the people who are immunized were. Okay, here's an immunized person. This person remains healthy. Here's an immunized person. This person remains healthy. You are literally immunized in your boundary. Here's the pathogen coming in. Person next to you here is unimmunized and currently healthy. The pathogen comes at you because you're immunized, so you don't get sick, and then spread it to that person. Being vaccinated, especially in a hospital environment, is you're the boundary between the virus or pathogen and the vulnerable people. That's what being vaccinated is. Okay. All right. So, and then if you have lots of people vaccinated, all right, do some people still get sick? Yeah, this person got sick. Okay. But really, the zone of protection around the unvaccinated people, okay, with all these people protected them. That's what herd immunity is. And here's the thing. It's not just about making sure the vulnerable people in society, in a community, don't contract the pathogen and get really sick, possibly die. Is you want to eradicate, say, COVID. You want to eradicate this virus like we did with polio and things like that, so that there's no longer any vulnerable bodies for that pathogen to make its host. And so if the pathogen cannot find a host and replicate and spread, that pathogen becomes obsolete. That pathogen gets eradicated. If you can't find a host and you're an infectious organism, you're going to go extinct. All right. And so that's what this is all about. Okay. So I don't think I need it. It was a gift, but it's not a really good one. But have I conveyed to you kind of what you kind of need to know about why we vaccinate? As nurses, you're going to encounter it. I guarantee it. You're going to be out there one day and be like, someone's like, oh, no, I'm not vaccinating for that. I'm not doing it. Some doctors' offices said in their practice, if you're not COVID vaccinated or whatever, you can't come in. Or if your kid is not measles, mumps, rubella vaccinated, pediatrician's office, right? Your kid ain't vaccinated. Don't bring that possible contagious kid into my practice and infect my patients. It's a real thing. Okay, guys. I will see you on Monday. Don't overthink it. Don't second guess yourself. Use the exam breakdown. Okay. Use those practice tests and any flow diagrams, and good luck.